Hey friend, you just found your peaceful haven for tonight. This is Midnight Narrative. And I created this space for people exactly like you who need rest but cannot seem to find it. Let these eerie tales become your lullaby tonight. You do not need to do anything except close your eyes and listen. Just a handful of ads in the first 10 minutes, then ad-free for the entire rest of the night. If this little haven brings you comfort, then I would love it if you subscribed to Midnight Narrative Sirsoro and tapped like. Let me know where you are finding shelter tonight in the comments below. You're home now. Let us begin this journey together, right now. The frequencies on the audio logs had sounded completely wrong when Marcus reviewed them in the clean, sterile light of the university laboratory. Strained, fluctuating, echoing with a rhythmic, low-frequency hum that didn't match any known weather pattern or atmospheric disturbance. At the time, he had written it off to old magnetic degradation, the physical wear and tear on vintage reel-to-reel tapes that had sat unread in an uninsulated mountain bunker for nearly 40 years. But now, as the heavy iron chain transport truck ground its gears, ascending the final vertical mile of Blackwood Ridge through a blinding, localized blizzard, Marcus stared into the whiteout and felt a sickening dread. The recording hadn't been distorted by age. It had been an exact, faithful transmission of the atmosphere up here, a warning written in static. The pines appeared first through the swirling snow, ancient, petrified trunks that grew too close together, their frozen needles clicking against one another like chattering teeth. Then came the sheer, jagged basalt cliffs of the ridge, and finally, the listening station itself. Station 7 was a brutalist block of poured concrete, stained dark by decades of ice and mineral runoff, anchored to the frozen rock by massive steel pylons. It looked less like a scientific research outpost and more like a bunker built to keep something terrible contained beneath the mountain. Marcus felt the crisp, multi-page corporate non-disclosure contract folded inside his heavy, down-filled parka. He pressed his hand against it twice as the truck's massive winter tires slipped, caught, and finally came to a halt in front of the station's armored blast doors. He didn't touch the paperwork to reassure himself of the reality of his employment. He did it to anchor his own agency. He had signed this. He had accepted the absurdly inflated salary. He had willingly boarded the transport. He could not, when the dark hours settled in, claim he was an innocent victim of circumstance. The private security firm handling the logistics for Apex Core Industries had played a snippet of the log for him just 48 hours ago. An operational necessity, the tight-lipped director had informed him in the secure facility. We need an acoustic technician with absolute vocal isolation skills, someone who can accurately read the automated baseline scripts back into the transmission array to maintain the station's deep ground echo calibration. Marcus had listened to the previous technician's voice on the tape, a man named Thomas, and had been deeply unsettled by how mechanical, how utterly drained of human inflection it sounded. It was a voice stripped of soul. But the director had assured him that Thomas had simply completed his contract and retired with full benefits. Marcus had needed the money to save his family's farm. He had packed his gear in less than an hour. The ridge waited. The concrete monolith watched. Marcus hauled his heavy military-grade duffel bag from the truck bed. The air at this altitude was thin, freezing, and tasted faintly of copper and ozone. A man in heavy gray winter tactical gear stood by the bunker's main airlock, his face entirely concealed behind a dark mirrored visor. He did not say a word, nor did he offer to help with the heavy gear. He simply punched a 7-digit code into the digital keypad, hydraulic seals hissed violently, and the heavy steel door swung inward into a dimly lit concrete tunnel. Marcus stepped across the threshold. The interior smelled intensely of industrial grease, recycled oxygen, and something deeply chemical, like the harsh floor stripper used in psychiatric wards or old underground morgues. The security guard slammed the outer door shut, the deadbolts throwing automatically with a sound like a gunshot. They began walking down into the earth. They moved in absolute dead silence through a labyrinth of identical gray-painted concrete corridors. The walls were lined with heavy humming conduits and thick bundles of black cables that vibrated so intensely Marcus could feel the resonance in the soles of his boots. He had been told Station 7 was isolated, but the reality of being buried beneath half a mile of solid granite and packed ice during a high-altitude winter was suffocating. There were no windows, no natural light, no connection to the outside world except for a single high-frequency radio array that only transmitted in a one-way burst once every 24 hours. A quick pause. Friend. Before we descend any further into the concrete labyrinth of Station 7, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever entered a space where every survival instinct in your body screamed at you to turn back, but the financial or social pressure forced you to take another step? Share your experiences in the comments. Let's talk in the dark. After 5 minutes of navigating the subterranean maze, the guard led Marcus into a central command hub. The room was circular, dominated by bank after bank of flickering emerald green cathode ray monitors and ancient analog audio mixing boards. The glowing screens cast long, sickly green shadows across the concrete walls. In the center of the room, sitting perfectly erect at a steel command console, was Dr. Vance. She was a woman in her late 60s, her steel gray hair cropped into a razor-sharp military bob. Her skin was translucent, showing the faint blue web of veins beneath, and her eyes were entirely dark, unblinking and vacant of warmth. She wore a pristine, unblemished white lab coat over a severe black turtleneck. She didn't rise to greet him. She merely turned her head with a slow, mechanical deliberation that made Marcus's stomach turn. She extended a pale, bony hand. Her skin was shockingly cold, not the cold of someone who had just come in from the snow, but the deep, internal chill of a refrigerator. Her grip was tight, almost painful, lingering just long enough to assert complete dominance. She introduced herself as the chief director of the Echo Protocol. She noted that the previous technician, Thomas, had left his station abruptly, and that they were grateful Marcus could fill the vacancy on such short notice. Her voice was terrifyingly monotone. Each syllable was separated from the next by a precise, rhythmic interval, sounding less like human speech and more like a text-to-speech program, reading from a highly classified technical manual. She guided him to his living quarters, located directly adjacent to the primary broadcast vault. It was a Spartan, windowless cell featuring a narrow iron cot bolted directly to the concrete floor, a small steel desk with a built-in microphone and a single gooseneck lamp, a wall-mounted speaker that emitted a continuous, low-level white noise, a heavy steel wardrobe containing 6 identical sets of gray industrial coveralls. The silent guard dropped Marcus's duffel bag onto the floor and exited, the heavy door clicking shut with an electronic lock. Marcus sat on the edge of the cot. The mattress was hard, offering zero give. The air in the room was completely stagnant, smelling of old ozone and the faint copper tang of dried blood that someone had tried desperately to scrub away with industrial bleach. He pulled his copy of the contract from his coat. The terms were incredibly specific. 30 days, $50,000. It was an astronomical sum for an audio technician. The daily requirements were outlined in a separate laminated booklet on the desk. Every hour on the hour, from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., Marcus was required to sit at the broadcast console, activate the deep ground transmitter, and read a specific series of alphanumeric codes into the microphone. The official explanation given by Apex Corps was that Station 7 sat directly above a massive, unstable subterranean fault line. The continuous vocal transmissions were part of an advanced acoustic-seismic stabilization program. The human voice, modulated at specific frequencies, supposedly interacted with the deep earth echoes to prevent tectonic shifts that could collapse the regional infrastructure. But sitting alone in the cold, humming heart of the mountain, looking at the identical gray coveralls in the wardrobe, Marcus realized the explanation made absolutely no scientific sense. The human voice didn't possess the acoustic energy to stabilize millions of tons of solid rock. They were hiding something deep beneath the concrete. A sharp, high-pitched tone suddenly blared from the wall-mounted speaker. It was the signal for the evening meal. The communal mess hall was a long, narrow concrete bunker containing a single stainless steel table. Dr. Vance sat at the head of the table. To her left and right sat two other researchers, a young, incredibly gaunt man whose hands trembled continuously, and a woman whose face was entirely devoid of expression, her eyes staring blankly at the metal tabletop. Marcus was directed to sit directly opposite Dr. Vance. At the far end of the long table, a fourth-place setting had been meticulously arranged. A stainless steel tray, a plastic cup of water, and a set of utensils. No one sat there. The chair was empty. Marcus adjusted his collar, the low-frequency hum of the bass vibrating through his teeth. "Are we waiting on the rest of the night shift, Dr. Vance?" The older woman slowly raised her gaze from her tray. "That station belongs to Technician Thomas," she said, her voice dropping into a flat, cavernous register. "His place will remain set for the entirety of your 30-day rotation. The broadcast array requires a 5-point human resonance baseline. Even the absent must be accounted for." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "I thought Thomas left the mountain." Dr. Vance didn't answer. She simply picked up her fork and began consuming her meal with mechanical, rhythmic movements. The food was completely unidentifiable, a thick gray nutrient paste that tasted faintly of chalk and salt. No one spoke. The only sound in the entire mess hall was the synchronous, rhythmic scraping of metal utensils against stainless steel. After dinner, Dr. Vance led Marcus into the broadcast vault. The room was entirely lined with black sound-absorbing foam pyramids, making the air feel thick, heavy, and completely dead. In the center sat a single steel chair facing a massive vintage console. A heavy industrial microphone hung from an articulating arm, its metal mesh glittering under a single red spotlight. Dr. Vance opened a heavy ledger on the console, revealing rows of handwritten entries. 0600, baseline alpha. Aero 700, baseline bravo. Aero 800, seismic adjustment. The handwriting was tiny, erratic, and written with such force that the pen had torn through the paper in several places. "You will begin the calibration protocol tomorrow morning," Dr. Vance instructed, her shadow stretching long against the acoustic foam. "You will wear the gray coveralls provided. You will not alter your pitch, your volume, or your cadence. You must speak exactly as the script demands." Marcus looked at the ledger. "And if the deep ground echo changes? If I hear a response?" Dr. Vance froze. Her pale hands gripped the edge of the steel console, her knuckles turning a stark, bloodless white. For a brief second, her mechanical mask slipped, revealing a look of profound, primal terror in her wide, unblinking eyes. "If you hear the deep ground echo change," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly, "you do not stop reading. You read louder. You read faster. If the baseline drops, the mountain opens." She snapped the ledger shut, turned, and marched out of the vault, the heavy acoustic door sealing behind her with a pressurized hiss. Marcus was left alone in the dead room. He lay down on his iron cot, but sleep was a distant impossibility. The low-frequency hum of the station seemed to be getting louder, vibrating through the concrete, through the iron frame of his bed, directly into his bones. Every 20 minutes, the wall-mounted speaker would emit a strange, wet, clicking sound, like someone trying to swallow with a completely dry throat. And from deep beneath the floorboards, far below the foundation of the bunker, he could hear a low, rhythmic thumping. It sounded exactly like a massive subterranean heart, beating slow and steady in the dark. At exactly 5:55 a.m., the wall-mounted speaker screamed with a violent, high-frequency tone that made Marcus's ears bleed. He threw himself out of bed, his joints stiff from the freezing cold of the room. He quickly pulled on the gray industrial coveralls. They fit him with a bizarre, terrifying precision. The inseam, the chest width, the sleeve length were all exact down to the millimeter. But when he slid his hands into the deep side pockets, his fingers brushed against something small and hard. He pulled it out. It was a silver dental filling, caked in dry brown residue. Before he could process the horror of what he was holding, the door unlocked with a loud electronic snap. Dr. Vance was standing in the corridor, her dark eyes fixed on his face. "It is 0600 hours, Marcus. The baseline awaits." He marched into the broadcast vault and sat in the steel chair beneath the red spotlight. He pulled the heavy microphone close to his mouth. Dr. Vance stood behind him in the shadows, her presence cold and suffocating. "Open the ledger to page 1, she commanded. "Read the baseline initialization." Marcus opened the book. The script consisted of endless, nonsensical strings of numbers and phonetics. Alpha 90 Echo Hold Vance 77. He cleared his throat, activated the transmitter, and began to read. As the words left his lips, he noticed a horrific phenomenon. The audio monitors on the console weren't tracking his voice. The green needles were bouncing, but the digital waveform displayed on the cathode ray screen was completely static. It was a flat, unyielding line that didn't change regardless of his inflection. "Your cadence is too human," Dr. Vance hissed from the darkness. "Strip the emotion from your throat. Speak like the machine." Alistair Vance did not allow variation. Thomas did not allow variation. "You are a biological relay, nothing more." Marcus forced his voice to flatten. He read the numbers for an hour, his throat becoming dry, raspy, and raw. When he reached the end of the first block, a deep, resonant sound boomed from the subsurface monitors. It was an audio return from the deep earth. But it wasn't a seismic echo. It was a voice. A deep, distorted, multi-layered voice that mimicked his own vocal timbre, repeating the exact alphanumeric codes he had just transmitted, but backwards. Marcus slammed his hand onto the kill switch, his heart hammering against his ribs. What the hell was that? That's not a tectonic echo. That's a voice. Dr. Vance stepped into the red light, her face twisted into a mask of pure, fanatical fury. She grabbed his shoulder, her icy fingers digging into his muscle with unnatural strength. "You do not cut the feed. The deep ground is calibrating. It is learning your resonance. If you break the loop now, it will come up through the conduits." "I'm out," Marcus gasped, throwing the headset onto the console. "Take your money. Call the transport truck. I'm leaving the ridge." The older woman looked at him, her anger instantly dissolving into a cold, pitiless amusement. "There is no transport truck, Marcus. The blizzard will seal this ridge for the next 5 months. The doors are locked from the corporate office in the city. You will sit in that chair, or you will become the baseline permanently. Let's sit in the shadow, friend." Marcus is trapped beneath the ice, and the mountain is beginning to speak back in his own voice. If you found a piece of a previous worker in your uniform pocket, would you keep playing along to survive? Or would you try to break the machinery? Tell me your survival strategy in the comments. By the second week of his isolation, Marcus had ceased to exist as an individual. He no longer looked at his face in the stainless steel mirror of the latrine. Whenever he did, he could swear his pupils were dilating in sync with the emerald green flashing lights of the broadcast console. His natural speech patterns were completely obliterated. When he spoke to the silent researchers in the mess hall, his voice was a flat, monotonal drone that vibrated at exactly 60 hertz. His hands had developed a continuous rhythmic tremor that perfectly matched the vibration of the floor conduits. He didn't write notes in his journal anymore. His fingers would only produce long, jagged rows of alphanumeric codes, scratched into the wood of his desk with his fingernails until they bled. He knew with a dull, absolute certainty that the gray coveralls weren't standard issue. They were Thomas's clothes. The silver filling in his pocket had belonged to Thomas. And the empty chair at the end of the dining table wasn't a memorial. It was a vacancy that was slowly, methodically pulling Marcus into its space. On the 29th night, the station's main power grid suddenly failed. The humming conduits went dead. The green cathode ray monitors flickered out, plunging the subterranean complex into an absolute, pitch-black silence that felt heavy enough to crush his lungs. The continuous white noise from the wall speaker died. Marcus sat in the dark of his cell, his heart beating in the silence. For the first time in weeks, the mechanical fog in his brain lifted. He remembered his name. He remembered his family's farm. He remembered the daylight. Then, the emergency backup systems kicked in. But they didn't restore the standard lights. The corridors were flooded with a flashing, rhythmic, crimson emergency strobe. The door to his cell slowly slid open. Marcus stepped out into the red-drenched hallway. The air was freezing now, the heating elements dead. He walked toward the central command hub, his boots crunching on a layer of fine white frost that was beginning to form on the concrete walls. When he entered the room, he saw Dr. Vance and the two other researchers standing in a tight geometric triangle around the central broadcast console. They weren't looking at the dead monitors. They were staring directly at the heavy steel door that led down into the deepest subsurface vault, the vault where the transmission cables descended into the earth. The heavy, reinforced steel door was bulging inward. Something on the other side was pressing against the metal, distorting the heavy steel with a slow, immense hydraulic force. With every rhythmic pulse of the emergency red strobe, the metal groaned, the rivets popping out of the frame like bullets. Dr. Vance turned her head toward Marcus. Her eyes were completely bloodshot, the vessels shattered by the low-frequency resonance. A thin, continuous stream of dark blood was trickling from both of her ears, staining her white lab coat. "The baseline has shifted," she whispered, her voice no longer mechanical but filled with a hollow, absolute despair. "The deep ground has finished its replication. It doesn't need the transmission anymore. It has mastered the voice." A violent, explosive boom shook the entire foundation of the ridge. The heavy steel door to the lower vault burst off its hinges, flying across the command hub and smashing into the cathode ray banks in a shower of sparks and green glass. From the dark, yawning chasm of the lower vault, a wave of intense, suffocating cold spilled into the room. It brought with it the smell of ancient, undisturbed earth, crushed bone, and wet, stagnant iron. And then, the sound began. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a monster's scream. It was a chorus. Thousands of voices, all perfectly synchronized, began to chant the alphanumeric initialization script from the ledger. Alpha 90 Echo Hold Vance 77. But the terrifying core of the sound was that every single voice in that subterranean chorus belonged to Marcus. It was his voice, multiplied by infinity, echoing up from the black bowels of the mountain. The gaunt researcher screamed, covering his ears, but his own voice instantly locked into the frequency of the chorus. His jaw distended uncomfortably, his lips moving in perfect sync with the deep earth chant as his body began to walk backward, stiffly, into the darkness of the open vault. The female researcher followed him, her movements completely mechanical, her unblinking eyes fixed on the black void. Dr. Vance looked at Marcus, a strange, terrifying expression of scientific triumph crossing her bleeding face. The anchor didn't hold the mountain down, she croaked, her voice being swallowed by the rising volume of the chorus. The anchor was a hook, and we've just been reeled in. She turned on her heel and marched into the dark, her bare feet clicking rhythmically against the frosted concrete. Marcus was left alone beneath the flashing red spotlight of the command hub. The chorus from the vault was deafening now, a wall of pure acoustic energy that vibrated his teeth so intensely they began to crack in his gums. His limbs were no longer under his own control. His right leg lifted, stiff and heavy, stepping forward toward the broadcast console. His left leg followed. He sat down in the steel chair. He reached out his hands, his fingers moving with flawless mechanical precision over the dead mixing board. He pulled the heavy industrial microphone to his lips. The transmitter was dead, its wires severed by the blast. But as Marcus opened his mouth, he realized he didn't need the machinery anymore. The voice that emerged from his throat didn't belong to a man. It was a deep, multi-layered tectonic resonance that perfectly filled the empty spaces in the subterranean chorus. He began to read the final page of the ledger, the page he had never been allowed to see. The text wasn't numbers. It was a sequence of structural release codes for the tectonic plates of the entire northern continent. He knew that if he finished the page, the ridge would collapse. The mountain would swallow the valley, and the black, ancient consciousness beneath the rock would finally breathe the open air. He wanted to stop. He wanted to bite his own tongue off, to choke on his own blood rather than read the next line. But his jaws were locked in a mechanical cycle, his lungs expanding and contracting with a cold, industrial rhythm that wasn't his own. He reached the final paragraph. The red strobe light flashed one last time, then burned out completely, leaving the vault in absolute, eternal darkness. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this journey, friend. It means the world to have your company in this quiet space. I warmly invite you to return to run our Midnight Narrative, another time when the world grows too loud and you need a peaceful sanctuary to rest your mind. Before you drift off into a deep, uninterrupted sleep, please let me know in the comments below where you are watching and finding shelter from tonight. Whether you are listening from a rainy city apartment or a quiet house in the countryside, I truly appreciate your presence here with me tonight. Sleep well, friend. You are safe now. Good night.